Mike, what is BKS's core service or core business? What do you guys focus on primarily?
We are an IT managed services provider. So we basically handle companies' IT management, support. We'll do that either as a sole provider, where we may partner up with an internal team. That internal team could be a person that wears multiple hats. It could be a sole person that just focuses on IT alone, or it could also be a team where they have maybe 4 or 5 people. Depending on how they're configured, it usually comes into, I always look at it as capability and capacity. Capability, do they have the knowledge to be able to manage the technology themselves? And then capacity is just, is there enough hours in the day?
So do you do kind of a hybrid? In other words, if they have partial capacity, you guys kind of fill in, or do you usually?
We will do, as an example, I've got a proposal out where they've actually got 2 internal IT guys, and they're just busy focused on keeping the lights on, meaning that the systems are up, stable, and running. They've got a server upgrade, and they've got a network upgrade they need to accomplish. And that, in terms of getting new equipment in, configuring it, setting up, and so forth, they don't have time to go through that effort. Here, this is an example of lack of capacity. They just don't have the time to keep both the lights on as well as do the upgrades. So we're coming in just to do the upgrades.
So when you work with a client, say where you're just doing upgrades and they're kind of at capacity now as far as handling their own system, what do they do when there's a power outage, when there's loss of data? What do they do?
Well, it really, I guess it comes down to, do they have a disaster recovery plan in place? Have they thought through this in advance so that they know, okay, we have a power outage. What is our first step to get our systems back online? What is the next step to make sure that our employees are able to continue their work without sitting around twiddling their thumbs? Really kind of comes down to, have they thought through this and planned that out in advance? What a lot of times, part of the idea is, when you take a look at technology, you're going to be looking for your single points of failure. If this fails, does it stop us from being able to run our business? If you find those single points of failure, then the idea is you want to remove that single point of failure. Either mitigate the risk of failure, or come up with some kind of redundancy.
I see. So a power outage, as far as some catastrophes or disasters, could be minor compared to a fire, right? Where you lose the building, you lose the equipment, a flood, hurricane, earthquake, a tornado, which is a huge disaster. Now you're talking about facility failure as well as IT or data failure.
Yeah.
So what mechanisms do you put in place for a large disaster? Now, clearly in the Midwest, you don't have hurricanes. However, in the Gulf, you do, right? The Gulf states. What do you do for facility failure?
Well, facility failure is a matter of, okay, so people aren't going to be able to be in the office. So how are they going to be connecting to whatever data sources they have and systems that they have? How are they going to connect remotely? Do they need an alternative workspace? Hold on 1 second, sorry. Do they have an alternative workspace? A big part of it is, look, if that data is housed inside that facility, there better be a copy of it somewhere outside that facility that can be restored to some kind of temporary infrastructure that the company can continue to operate upon until they're able to actually replace the damaged infrastructure at the facility they were at, and then be able to reoccupy that facility. So taking a step back, when you make reference to a power failure, the biggest thing with power failure is, do you have the ability for your systems to gracefully shut down, which is where you get uninterrupted power supplies. It's really nothing more than just a battery that's on site, that's plugged in, that's charged up, but it gives you enough power to be able to power everything down gracefully. if a server, as an example, is in the process of fulfilling some kind of a command or process, and you lose power and that server just shuts down, you could end up with corrupted programs and corrupted data. So you want to be able to have that ability to gracefully shut down. Now, for somebody who doesn't want to just gracefully shut down, it's mission critical that they stay online and operational. Then you're looking at some kind of backup generator, alternative power source.
Now, the data could be stored on site, right? Or it could be stored in the cloud. But either way, I'm sure you're recommending daily, if not hourly, backup, depending on the facility and what the data is, right?
Well, it's a business. Yeah, exactly. It's a business decision. We always refer to RTO and RPO. So RTO, recovery time objective, RPO, recovery point objective. So RTO is how fast can you get back up and operational with the systems that you need? What's an acceptable gap? Is it 1 day outage? Is it 4 day outage? Is it 1 hour outage? And then the other part, the RPO, recovery point objective, is how old is the data going to be that you restore? So as an example, if I'm backing up daily, by default, I have an RPO of 1 day. Because as an example, if my backup occurs at 6 o'clock at night, but my system fails the next day at 4 o'clock, I've lost all that data between 6 o'clock last night and 4 o'clock today. Big challenge on both of those is obviously the closer, the shorter those timeframes are, the more expensive the solution is that you're going to have to implement. Continuous backups, hot site replication, where you've got an alternative site that everything's replicating over to automatically, and if this fails over here, you're automatically rolled over to that other site. As you can imagine, that's pretty expensive because you're going to be maintaining effectively 2 sites.
So with COVID, we saw a lot of, especially small businesses, close down for a period of time. Some are still closed. Some are trying to restart. Some have restarted and now they're reclosing again, depending on what state they're in. If you have a retail store, or let's take a restaurant out of the mix right now, but it could be an accountant, could be a law firm, and all of their computers are on site, but now their employees and even the executive staff are working from home. How do they connect to those computers as a team and then also back up data? Again, the server is at the law firm or the accounting firm, and somebody's trying to connect to it from home with their staff. How do they do that?
Well, typically what will happen is hopefully they were already set up for that. You're going to have to remote into that server in some shape or form. And that could be where somebody's coming through a remote desktop setup where they're actually remoting into their computer, and then from their computer that's inside the office that they've remote connected to, they're accessing the server internally that way. It could also be set up such that they're actually coming in through their firewall through a virtual private network. Virtual private network, what they refer to as a VPN connection, is much more secure than remote desktop protocols. But ideally, what you want to do is have that data. If it was my choice, I would want to have that data replicated over the cloud in some shape or form. A file sync share solution, something that's like, if you're looking at enterprise style, very pricey, but very high powered, something like Citrix ShareFile would be an option. You can do the same file sync share solution with OneDrive, which comes with Microsoft 365. We use a system called Workplace, does the same thing. The idea being that is my data is residing on my computer, it's syncing up to the cloud, and then anytime I change it on my computer, it syncs it to the cloud. If I've got it synced as well to any other device, it's also syncing to that device. So I have access to my data no matter what device I have, either because it's synced already to that device, or I have access to a web browser that I can peer into the cloud to see that data. It makes it such that you don't have to worry about that connection back into the facility. And with COVID, it was all about and still is, how do you give access to your employees to that data remotely? File sync share is probably the easiest way. More expensive, yeah, you're gonna be doing some kind of VPN tunneling in or some kind of remote desktop protocol. Hoping I'm not throwing out too much jargon, but it's, bottom line, if it's easier to access it, it's easier to access the data if it's outside the four walls of the business. That also presents a security risk, which is a reason why a lot of people say, I don't want to put my data up in the cloud. I think that security risk has been not mitigated, but it's minimized over the last 5 years. I think you've got a lot more solid security procedures and setups that allow you to remotely access data that's in the cloud without fear of data loss or compromise.
There's
usually happening because of user error in today's world. Somebody's not thinking before they share data, or they're not thinking before they click on a link that results in a ransomware infection or something like that. It's more user error than somebody breaching.
There's a court case in Florida where the IRS sued a business, and won actually. The business had gone through a hurricane, lost all their data, the building got wiped out, all their files were gone. And their argument was that because of the hurricane, they couldn't file their taxes on time correctly. They didn't have all the information. They lost information. Well, the IRS didn't accept that. They sued them, and the court favored with the IRS because they said in today's IT world, they could have backed it up. They could have saved it. They could have put it into the cloud. They had a warning that the hurricane was coming, down to 5-day, 3-day, 2-day, and they still didn't remove their data. So
yeah,
now that there's a precedence for that, what would you recommend for a business in a Gulf state or an Atlantic state, hurricane area? How can they protect their business right now? How can they get ready for that kind of an event?
I think the first and foremost thing is make sure you've got backups. Back up your data and make sure your backed up data is not stored on site. It's interesting the number of companies that will start supporting, and we find out that they're just backing up a copy and it's located on site. Well, the problem is if your backed up copy is on an external hard drive or tapes or a thumb drive and it's on site, you're protected from a ransomware attack because it's, you've got a separate copy over here. You can't jump from one system to something else just through the air. It's got to be connected. So if it's not connected, you're protected from ransomware. But in terms of a natural disaster, if your facility gets hit or you have a fire, not only is your original state piece of data going to be destroyed, but that backup copy that you've left there on site is going to be destroyed. The other thing is a lot of companies will rely on, okay, well, we have an external hard drive and I plug it in, and me, the executive, I take my plugged in copy and then I swap out another one and I take the one that I unplugged and I take it home.
Right.
Well, better than keeping it on site, but then you also run the risk of you're not geographically distributed where you're storing the data. More than likely, if that facility is going to get hit by a hurricane, I would assume that executive probably lives within a commuting distance. What happens if also their home's hit? As well as just human error. I was overworked and I didn't think about doing the backup and I forgot to do it. So, the best idea is to set up some kind of an automated backup function. Typically, you want to do something that's going to get it stored up in the cloud. We like to talk about what's referred to disk to cloud type backup. So if I've got my production system, my server or my workstation, or a set of workstations, and I'm backing that data directly up from those up into the cloud, I am going to degrade the performance of the devices I rely on because they're in the process of doing that backup through the cloud. If instead I use a backup appliance, I'm backing up from my local disks to another local device. That's a quicker backup, and then my local device is now replicating to the cloud. So that just preserves that backup and makes it less likely to be disruptive to the operation of your technology. And then to have that set such that those backups are occurring. But the other thing we'll see happen is people set backups to occur. They show that they are backing up, but they never test restore the data. And if you're backing up and the backups are corrupted and you're not aware of it, when you're trying to restore and you find out that your backups are corrupted, bad timing, right? So what we like to do is we recommend our clients, you do your backups, but then you also make sure that you're testing those backups so you know that you can restore them when, if and when it does happen.
So what is the lifespan of a thumb drive or an external hard drive that you would use a USB cord to plug in your computer? Because I've heard that when you put data on it, there's always a chance, like you said, of failure of that thumb drive if it sits for a period of time, a year, 2 years, 10 years. What is that? Do you have a concept of how long that would be?
I can't give you a specific answer on it. What I can tell you is what we typically look at when we look at mean time to failure, meaning what's the average time for things to fail. Rule of thumb within the business is that servers, you want to be replacing servers every 3 years. Workstations, you want to be replacing every 5 years. Some of that involves technical obsolescence, but some of it also is just the mean time to failure for the electronics. So if I were to say kind of how I would see that match up to that, I would say, you wouldn't want to go beyond 5 years. If you are going to back up to an external hard drive, better to be using an SSD, which is a solid state drive. You're minimizing the internal mechanical workings of it. You don't have a spindle where plates are spinning. So you're not going to have a spindle failure. So you're better off backing up to a solid state drive versus a traditional hard disk. Thumb drives, I've got thumb drives at home that I've got data on that's probably from 7-8 years ago. It's not real critical data though. If it was critical data, I wouldn't have it on a thumb drive. The other problem with thumb drives are considered a security risk in general. A lot of system infections will occur because it's brought in on a thumb drive.
Do thumb drives
Anyone using the thumb drive, I don't think you need to worry about it, but if that thumb drive is something that came from somebody else or you're sharing the thumb drive, that just exposes a security risk that you could probably do without.
Do thumb drives fail because of age, because they're dropped, because they're overused?
I've never heard of a thumb drive failing because of overuse. It's more because they're dropped, they're stepped on, somebody spills a cup of coffee on them. By nature, they're small and portable and easy to throw in a briefcase. Well, I throw it in my briefcase and then I throw a big old laptop down on top of it and it cracks that case of the thumb drive, then I might have an issue.
So with your firm, do you sell hardware? Do you manage the IT? Do you sell software? Do you train? What are the services that you provide?
Well, so I kind of always look at it as if you use the trains analogy, you got trains and you got train tracks. Your train tracks are your infrastructure. Your trains are your software. We're not software guys. We're train track guys. We manage the infrastructure, the networks, computers, and servers that all the applications run on top of. Typically, application support is going to be done by the application manufacturer. But you got to make sure that you've got those train tracks set up such that those trains can run on them. If I use an example out of, I'm not trying to ding on the French, but there was several years ago, there was some train stations that were upgraded in France. When they tried to pull the trains in to the train stations, they couldn't pull them in because the platforms were too wide.
Oh, no.
So this is kind of when I look at that, it's kind of like, okay, so if you're going to be running new software or new ERP, things like that, where we would get involved is taking a look and saying, okay, is your existing infrastructure going to support those applications? Just using that as the analogy. But yeah, our responsibility is to make sure that infrastructure is reliable, stable, and available.
So you could look at a company's infrastructure, you could look at the equipment, you could look at the software, the data they're trying to protect, and then put together a disaster recovery plan for them in the event of power failure, fire, tornado, hurricane. So really, I guess the disaster isn't as critical as what are they going to do and how they're going to recover it.
Well, yes, disasters are going to occur. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right? So whether or not that disaster is something that is natural events, hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, floods, fires, it's probably not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But then you've also got disasters now that are being triggered by people not doing the right thing, which allows a virus, malware, ransomware to come in. Bottom line, you can't use the systems that you were counting on being able to use. So what we do is we'll take a look at what companies are using. Again, we kind of take a look at, okay, where are the single points of failure? If that single point of failure happens, to get it restored to working order is going to violate what your RTO and your RPO objective is. If that single point of failure is going to restore that single point of failure, if it's going to prevent you from meeting your RTO and your RPO goals, then you got to mitigate that single point of failure. And it's either changing out the equipment or doing a redundant device. Again, what we're trying to do is mitigate the risk of what happens being disruptive to the business. Back to a question you asked about hardware sales, we can sell hardware. We're more interested in what our clients buy, not where they buy it. So as an example, if we did go through this and somebody was, say we found weakness in the way they've got their network configured, and we made a recommendation to upgrade switches on the network. We'll go ahead and spec out, this is the kind of switch we think you need. We'll quote it through one of our distribution channels. We probably aren't going to be the cheapest price, but we're not really in it to sell the gear. We just want to make sure you're buying the right thing. And then when we share those type of quotes with our clients, it's actually our client's going to buy directly from distribution. They don't buy it through us.
I see.
But yeah, again, it comes down to we care what you buy, not where you buy it. And that kind of goes back into, look, we want to make sure that we're able to make sure your systems stay reliable, stable, and available. And
so another question I have for you, you're in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
How would you service a client several states away or across the country? Do you have those capabilities?
Yes, we do. Actually, we've got a number of national clients with locations on the West Coast, in the Appalachians, East Coast, some in the Southeast. Today's connected world, it's easy to support distributed clients from a remote connectivity standpoint. Again, you can't always do everything remotely though. If somebody has a device that's just not connecting to the network, and somebody needs to physically touch it, we'll put engineers on a plane, or we'll lean into partners that we have in different locations. We're part of a national network of people like us, managed service providers, that lean into each other to be able to put smart hands on site to do something when either the travel expense is prohibitive or the travel time is prohibitive. If travel expense and travel time is not prohibitive, we like to have our own guys do the work, obviously. But in today's connected world, it's amazing the amount of work that actually can be done remotely. Now, in a disaster, and you're saying if something, a server blew up, and you had to put a new server on site, you're going to stage that equipment remotely in the first place anyway, before bringing it on site. So it'd be a combination of remote and on-site work, but it's not, we look at it as not an issue. We're a local company in the Chicagoland area, but we work on a national basis.
Is there a protocol in place that you've created or follow, say after an event, let's say after a hurricane or after a flood, how to restart the equipment? Do you make sure it's dried out first? Do you let it sit for a while? I mean, what do you do? What is the protocol?
Well, yeah, you need to make sure that equipment's dried out. Never restart something if it's wet. Kind of like your cell phone. They say if you drop your cell phone in the water, power it off immediately, let it dry out, and then try to repower it up. It's a matter of going through and making sure things are dried out as much as possible. And then it's kind of babysitting the power up process. When something gets wet, there's really no guarantee that it will power back up. Part of the problem with when devices get wet is sediment that is in the water that settles onto circuit boards. Using a mobile phone as an example, you drop your mobile phone in a pool of water, and you get it out of the pool of water and you turn it off and you shake it out and you get as much water out as possible. Some people say, well, you take that mobile phone, you put it in a bowl of rice. Rice will act as an absorbent to pull water out of the device. Well, you can pull all that moisture out, but if there was any sedimentation in the water, that sedimentation stays on inside the device and could be on a circuit board and create a short. Just with a mobile device, that's one of the reasons why they say, well, what you should do is you take your mobile device and you dunk it into a bowl of denatured alcohol. Because denatured alcohol, when it dries, leaves no residue. And what you're going to do is you're going to displace the water that's in there with denatured alcohol. Well, that's easy to do with a mobile device.
Right.
But to take a server or a SAN device or network attached storage and actually put that into a vat of denatured alcohol, I don't think you're going to do it. But it's a matter of, dry it out and then power it up and see what happens. Hopefully what you have is you have a plan to either have people working remotely and accessing their data that's already replicated to the cloud, so you're not waiting to figure out, does this server work or not? Or you've got a secondary facility where that information data has been replicated over, so now people, instead of pointing to your server that was inside your office, are now pointing instead over to this other location. And I guess the other thing about it that we counsel companies on is having what's called a disaster recovery run book. And the idea of a run book is it's line by line directions in terms of how to restore the technical operations of the company without your technology team being available.
Interesting.
Because if you have, if you think about it, so I'm a 50-person company, and I got one guy or gal on my team that specifically focuses on maintaining the technology. Well, in a disaster, depending on what kind of disaster it is, that person might not be available. They might not be able to get to the office. They may be worried about their own family, their own safety. And if they're not available, then how do you turn back things back on? How do you get things back to the point where people can be doing their business functions? Well, the idea is to have what's called a disaster. Sorry about that. I had a call coming through. The idea is that disaster recovery run book is something you can give to somebody who's just got a little bit of technology chops. Probably just somebody that's what we would consider a super user. They're pretty good with understanding the workings of a computer. You're not going to have them doing big upgrades, but they can follow directions. They're going to take that disaster recovery run book and they're going to go page by page. I do this first, I do this first, second, I do this third, I do this fourth, I do this fifth, etc. The other thing is that disaster recovery run book. You need more than one copy of it. If you're working off of paper copies, you need more than one copy. And your copy better not be in that facility that you can't get access to.
Right.
Again, another great use for the cloud. You make your DR run book electronic, you put it up in the cloud.
Right.
And then that way you can get access to it to make sure that, again, somebody can take it and run page by page to get the company back up and operational.
That's great. That's a good idea. So, Mike, how do people get in touch with you if they want to talk to you, get some information?
You know, I'm always willing to take a mobile phone call. Mobile phones always works. 312-805-0761. Or you can always drop me an email, mharvey, so MHARVEY at bksteam.com. BKS stands for Business Knowledge Systems. Just it's a lot easier to write down BKS versus Business Knowledge Systems.
Well, this has been good. I appreciate the time.
Well, I thank you for letting me get all geeked out on this stuff.
All right, Mike. Well, thanks. Have a great day, and we'll be in touch soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brad.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.